We can talk about Jerry Jeudy next. This was a guy, he may have not liked the recruiting process from a standpoint of like doing interviews and stuff like that. But I mean, he was an ultimate competitor. This was a guy that would show up to anything, anytime, anywhere, and
Yeah.
go over and over again. So Rob, tell us what you remember. Because I think Jeudy was kind of on the scene by the time you came to Florida because he was known as an underclassman. What do you remember most about him?
I remember the first time I met him thinking this kid is impossible to talk to. Like, it was like talking to a wall. He was a very, very, very shy kid, not comfortable at all with interviews, which is different because a lot of these Florida kids have a little bit of swagger to them and they'll talk to you and they'll chat you up. Jeudy was reserved. He had just transferred high schools. I think when I got here, he'd gone from Monarch to Deerfield Beach. And our thing with Jeudy was we had him as a very high floor, I think, for most of the time, 6.0. Because in games, they didn't really have a quarterback at Deerfield to get him the ball. So we loved him at camps, but the question mark was he doesn't really do it in games as much. And then his senior year, he started to. And I think that's kind of what put us over the edge. I think maybe in the second to last update, we made him a 5-star, and I don't think anybody regrets that. Just the separation he would get, I think, was the calling card. Because we'd see him line up at elite camps against elite DBs. I mean, you name them, even younger guys like the Patrick Surtains of the world and guys in Florida. And the separations that he would get from those guys consistently, I think, kind of blew you away. And we moved him up before All-Star season.
It was actually after the 5-star challenge. Because I remember it was in Atlanta that year, and he was so dominant in the early one-on-ones. He was just by far the best route runner and guy for separation. And then he kind of disappeared a little bit in the 7-on-7, and that's, of course, quarterback generated. It depends on your quarterback's vision, and I don't think he was on a very good 7-on-7 team.
I think he was on the famous worst 7-on-7 team of all time that I drafted that didn't win a game.
Was that the team wearing white?
Yeah, it was him, Nate Craig Myers. I mean, It was just a disaster. I don't think they might have scored 1 touchdown in 4 games.
They were horrible. But I remember having the discussion about Jeudy in between the one-on-ones and the little break that the kids got before the 7-on-7, and we talked about it. We're like, wow, this was one of the best performances we've seen in a very long time from a receiver as far as polished and able to set people up. And it almost seemed like he could do it when he wanted to, and he didn't always want to. Like when he wasn't involved in the 7-on-7, he's like, whatever. I'm still great. But yeah, I remember the moment that I saw him and said, okay, let's discuss this. And it was that June we moved him up, and it kind of worked out pretty well.
So, yeah, it worked out darn well.
So I remember seeing Jeudy I met Jeudy he was on the same team with Calvin Ridley and his brother Riley. And
lots of talkers there, huh?
Right, and Jerry Jeudy. And I remember
Calvin.
Yeah, I remember meeting them in a parking lot at like a Miami Dolphins 7-on-7 to do interviews. And I mean, it was just torture trying to get anything out of it. But think about that.
The Ridleys, man. The Ridleys were the same way.
Right. But think about that. There was a high school team that had 2 first-round picks, and I think what was the other Ridley, a 3rd-round pick? I mean, how did they not win the state championship?
And they didn't win the state championship.
I don't even know if they made the playoff.
And you know who else was on that team was a freshman, Greg Russo from Miami.
Yeah. So I mean, what an insane team. But yeah, Jeudy would go. If you remember, there was a clip from him from like Friday Night Lights at Florida's camp where he just went. Everybody knew he wasn't going to Florida, but he went to the camp anyway. I think for a visit. Then he decided to work out, and there was like a viral video of him just roasting kids during one-on-ones. Do you guys remember that clip?
Yeah, I do. He was one of those guys, like you mentioned. Him, just like that running back at Miami, Cam Davis, where you could go to a camp in like Arkansas and you'd run into Jerry Jeudy. What are you doing here? There's nothing going on in Florida, man. He was just always at something. Yeah, no matter where you were. I mean, you could have been in Pennsylvania, and it would have been that big of a shock to stumble into Jerry Jeudy running at some scam 7-on-7 camp in Pennsylvania.
So we did talk about when we moved him up. We were kind of an outlier, though. Mike, do you remember we were kind of on a limb in terms of ranking Jeudy as a 5-star?
Everybody had him as a high 4, I mean, I'm not saying that we were the only ones that said, hey, this kid's great. Everybody knew he was really, really good. There was a lot of discussion that year as far as the kids going to Alabama between Henry Ruggs, and we could segue into Henry Ruggs if you want, and Jerry Jeudy, which one was the better receiver going to Alabama that year. So, not really an outlier. An outlier to me is we had him as 5. Someone else has him outside their top 100 or something like that. I think everybody knew he was good, but we went all in on him more so than the other receivers in this class, and I think it's going to pan out that way.